Thank you. So welcome to the session, guys. First of all, a huge thank you to Wesson. It's amazing just listening to people, the fact that she puts this group together and hosts these events day in and day out. It's a testament to her commitment to get a networking group together and to distribute, connections. So a huge tribute to her. Thank you very much, Wesson. Well done on putting together this group and running with this group and doing events day in and day out. Okay. As Wesson said, I'll introduce myself. I'm Prakash. Throughout my career, I've done quite a few qualifications and hobbies. I'm a ICF accredited coach. I'm also an NLP practitioner. I do coaching for various executives, etc. I mostly do that as a hobby. I was more professional earlier on, but then I took a day job and I work in the financial services. But I do coaching and I also do presentations with organizations on and off. Again, these things I do on the side. So at the end of the session, if any of you want to reach out to me for just a chat, etc., or further discussions on some of these topics, you're always welcome to reach out to me. Before I start, I'll also make a little point on feedback. I'm very passionate about feedback, so I'm going to put on the chat a little SurveyMonkey link. If I could request you to click on it, not now, but the end of the meeting, or if you're leaving a little bit earlier, if I could request you to just click on that link and fill your survey in, that would be really, really useful for me. With that, I'll start. As Wesson suggested, this is about achieving more of your potential at the workplace. What can you do to get more from your workplace? We're a nice, cozy group, 15, 16 people. This is fantastic. What I want to encourage is, as more people come up, is interaction. I'm not going to, my topics are usually very simple in concept. Where I want to bring it to life is practical applications for everyone who is in the workplace, bringing in their stories and trying to see how simple concepts can be applied practically in their situations. So interaction is very, very important. Since if there's a slightly bigger group, I'm a little more conscious about raising your hands, asking questions in an orderly way, and at various slots. But a smaller group, I'm less worried about it. So please feel free. All I ask is if you can raise your hand on the Zoom session, I will then refer to you, but feel free to raise your hand at any point during the presentation. And I will also at various points seek your input. So please feel free to unmute and speak or put the message in the chat. For those who can't come on voice, if you're still listening, you can just put your answers on chat. I have the chat window open. So questions on chat, questions on hands up. Anyone can ask questions at any point. With that, I'll start. Right. So I'll introduce a main definition and some concepts about achieving your potential. And fundamentally, the premise I have is that all approaches to your workplace should have a positive approach. It's all about positive approach and it's developing your potential. That's synonymous. Positive approaches to develop and achieve your potential. That's the main highlight umbrella of this whole session. The concepts, I'm talking about three main concepts in which we will discuss potential and increasing your potential at work. It's about attitude. It's about effort. And it's about the execution of the attitude and the effort. So my premise to you is top of the file is a real proactive, positive attitude. Second part is the effort. And now most of you probably say, yes, I'm positive and I put in very hard work. What we will bring to light in the third part is the execution. Because you can have the best attitude and you can have the best effort, but if you aren't executing effectively, a lot of it is it limits your ability to achieve your potential. So we will discuss that in more detail as I go through these sections. Again, I have a few cliche assumptions. While the concepts will be very simple, there's no huge buzzwords, there's no deep scientific theories, there's no big research, it's simple concepts. The application of those concepts are not easy. So easy is nothing, it sounds simple, but executing that is never easy. And you can only assume the thoughts of someone else and you can't change them. So when we go into practical applications, we're going to talk about the difficult colleague, we're going to talk about the horrible boss, we can talk about other things, the challenges in the workplace. Excuse me. But those are, you have to look at it from what you can do and what's in your control. The thoughts of someone else, their intentions, you can only assume about what they are, and it's very difficult for you to change them. So there's a whole underlying concepts of taking proactive action and looking at things that are in your control. Okay, that's just a high level. Obviously, we'll go into details at this point. Okay, I'll take that as a no. Right. And yes, one more assumption, that is always, if there is an opportunity to react in a positive way, that's always preferable to reacting in a negative way. It sounds so cliche, it sounds so simple, but how many times do we feel our anger or frustrations get the better of us and we act in that way? That's human. But I'm not saying you can never act negatively, but bear in mind, if you're able to increase your positive reactions overall, they're always going to be better than your negative reactions. No one is a robot, I get that, but even being human, we can be better at how we react to situations. Okay, so let's talk about attitude, right? Now, hands up in this group, who has a negative attitude? Very good. I'm glad no one's put their hands up. I was hoping no one's sleeping, but I'm also hoping no one believes they have a negative attitude. So hands up people who understand what negative attitude means and have experienced it in other people. Let me see. Okay, two. Anyone? So has anyone experienced negative attitudes of other people in the workplace and understand and have experienced negative attitude? Hands up if you have. Okay, there's a few hands up. That's good. Okay, there's quite a few hands up. Thank you. So I would request people in the chat or just to unmute yourself and tell me what have they seen. What does negative attitude really? What are the negative attitude traits they've seen of people around them? Who wants to go first? Or they can put it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and just say something.
Can I add something?
Sure.
Thank you. Well, I believe, after working for
something like low engagement at the job, sometimes they hate their jobs because they don't know why they're in the job. They absolutely hate a Monday morning and they don't know why they're going to work. And then Friday evening, they are like so relieved that the week is over. Low energy levels, that's another common trait. You will see people with negative attitudes generally have lower energy levels. Their participation in discussions and meetings is usually geared towards resisting action. Now, I'm not suggesting that all resistance to all action is negative, but you will find as a trait, if it's fundamentally driven towards resistance to any change in status quo or any kind of proactive action, that's usually considered a negative trait as well. And competitive. Everything is constantly challenged. Now, cognitive conflict, we'll talk about that as well. It's healthy, but you can see that it's drained towards just challenging everything. There's also another trait of negative attitude is criticism of colleagues. And in a nice possible way, I suspect a big chunk of us have done that at some part in our workplace. Many of us have at some point criticized our colleagues. Typically, criticism of colleagues in a public forum or in a private forum when they're not there, when it's not part of feedback to the person, is typically a negative trait. Another trait is they actively look for and focus on the problem. You constantly find that these people, their starting sentence is, the problem here is this. The problem here is this. And it becomes very repetitive. Any kind of discussion, when you're having a meeting, look for people who constantly say, this is the problem, this is the problem. There's always the positive people who change that and say, this could be a solution. And as a fundamental shift, when you're constantly focusing on the problem, that is a negative trait. Gossip, we all have done that. We all have done that. And maybe not all of us, quite a few of us again. But that's a negative trait. When you're gossiping about other colleagues, you're not creating a positive environment around you. Okay, so what would be the equivalent positive traits be? And I'll if you want to put something in the chat, please do. But I've made a list. Okay, so it's the opposite of those negative traits. So positive attitude traits are high engagement and connectivity to their job, right? These people, you can also spot them. They don't mind a Monday morning so much. They're coming to work. They know what their job is. You ask them, what is your job? They know what they're doing. They know why they love it. They're engaged. They're motivated. They're connected. Okay? They typically, positive trait is a constant call to action. They act. They talking about it, and here are the problems. It's like, okay, let's take action A, action B, action C to solve and move forward. Okay, look for solutions in the controllable. I like what Westham wrote. Beware of people who have a problem for every solution. That's exactly the negative attitude. They're actively looking for a problem even when there's a solution. So yeah, that's exactly the negative. But the positive of that is they're always looking for solutions, but be careful. The looking for the solution has to be in the controllable. So typical, like for example, managers, they say, I need more resources, but they know they don't have the budget for more resources. I need more training. Maybe they don't have the budget for training. So looking for solutions that are not in their immediate practical realm is not ideal as well. You need to look for solutions in the controllable. If you develop a habit of constantly looking for action and actions based on solutions in the controllable, in your sphere of responsibility, in your sphere of accountability, taking accountability, that's a positive trait. Okay, and they always proactively look for ways to enjoy their work, whether it's a little joke here or something to make work more fun. They're constantly looking for ways to be happier in their workplace. Okay, any observations or comments on the positive attitude traits? We spent a lot of time on the negative. Again, I'll take a quick poll. How many people have seen some or all of these positive traits, either in the mirror or in people around them? Okay, 2, 3, 4 hands. Okay, so not many people. It's interesting. So I'm going to go in slides, a few slides later. I'm going to develop some use cases. I would hope that some of you have some good stories to share about positive colleagues, negative colleagues. I'm sure some of you have good stories to share about the horrible boss. because I'm going to try and apply some of these principles I'm projecting on the screen in those cases. So we'll come to that. But who else? So thank you for that. So people have seen the positive attitudes, at least some of them. And the idea is to embrace as much as possible into your own life. So from an attitude perspective, if you can develop those 4 or 5 positive attitude traits, you start to take the steps on the ladder to achieve more of your potential. Because by definition, negative attitudes limit and reduce your potential at work. Positive attitudes increase your potential at work. And just training your brain and your personality, and it requires training. My premise to you is we are all somewhere in between these 2 columns, right? We're not completely doing all of those positive bullet points all the time. We're probably not doing all of the left-hand side negative bullets all the time. Just somewhere in between. Developing the traits, going more towards the right, every step we take towards the positive attitude traits starts to develop our ability to achieve our potentials. And how do you do that? And how does attitude really matter? Okay. First of all, it's important because, as I explained, the positive attitude means you have a better opportunity to do things in your workplace. Positive attitude reduces stress. Anyone wants to challenge me on that? I'm making a premise that if you develop positive attitudes, your stress levels at work will reduce. I'm not saying they will go away. I'm not saying life will be all perfect. I'm saying compared to first, if you have negative attitudes, if you develop positive attitudes, whatever your current stress level is, it will come down. That's my premise. It's less stress, not no stress. You are able to use more intelligence. And this is also an interesting one. The cognitive brain works better under less stress. And that's, again, it's not rocket science. It's not some complex scientific theory. It's just simple concept. The more relaxed you are, the more in a positive state of mind you are, the more of your natural intelligence is accessible to you in your workplace. Okay. Again, if you develop positive traits, your emotional state becomes positive. Again, anyone wants to counter that? I doubt it, but as a principle, it's sacrosanct. Again, I'm not saying it's all easy and you just be positive all the time, but it's a question of training your brain. The more you go towards these points, the better it is, not for the world, which it is, but fundamentally for you. Any questions in the attitude slide? Nancy, you still have your hand up. Is there a question or is that from the previous?
No, I'm sorry, from the previous.
That's fine. Okay. If you press it again, it goes down and then you can bring it up whenever you want to ask a question.
I'll do that. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. Okay. So how do we develop positivity? I talked about going from left-hand side traits where we had the list of negative attitudes. And I'm inviting you to consider that at some point of time in your workplace, there's a little bit of negativity or negative attitude that creeps into us. We are all human beings. No one's a robot. No one's always in this utopian, perfect, positive world. At some point, we're all in that left-hand side displaying some of those traits. And that's fundamentally from the definition of being human. So how do we train ourselves to increase our space in which and duration in which we are in that positive state of mind? Okay, so let me do a quick exercise, and this is again open to everyone. All of you do this exercise. You can either think of it in your brain. If you want to share it on the chat, or write it on a piece of paper. If you want to share it, you can. If you don't want to share it, it's still okay. Define 5 things you like about your job in 3 minutes. Okay, type it on your own phone, in a notepad, Or if you want to use the chat, if there's nothing else to type on, you want to put it on the chat, you want to send me privately, or you want to send it publicly, that's okay. 5 things you like about your current job in 3 minutes, and the clock starts now. Thank you, Nancy. Gracias, Gerardo. So let me pause there. That's 3 minutes. How many of you were able to comfortably come up with 5 things in that period of time? And hands up. Okay. Only a couple of people. So you see, it is a little bit of a, there is difficulty in finding those 5 things about your job that you like. And if we go into a coaching session or a wider open space, or you think about it overnight, you'll think probably, oh yeah, there's that as well. And it comes in over a while, but it's very difficult to think of these 5 things on the tips of your fingers. And that's just one of the things in terms of how your mindset towards your job is. So how do you develop that? How do we develop our understanding of those things that we love about the job? Because don't forget, without exception, unless your dad forced you to be in his company and put you there, all of us went through an interview process where we applied for the job because we thought that was going to be a good job. We went for the process. We competed potentially with other candidates. We won that battle to get this job that we are in. It didn't just come forced upon us from somewhere, unless, you know, there's a unique scenario, your dad's the owner of the business, something like that. We'll pass that. But I hazard a guess, most of us, if not all of us, have worked hard to get our job through the interview process and through, you know, through competitive process. So it's at one point, at that entry point, when you came for the interview, and I would have, if I was the interviewer and I asked you, why would you want this job? That's the point when the 3, 4, 5 points would come out much more. And somehow when you're actually doing the job, some of these 5 points that you said in the interview start to get diluted, and we lose that. So Massimo says, if your job is your passion, you do not think to find 1 or 5 or 10 aspects of your job. You're like, well, I'm not saying I disagree. That's one perspective. But when you're passionate of something, you should be able to describe it. You know, I'm passionate about, let's say you're passionate about football, right? What about football do you like? You should be able to say, oh, everything, my club, the goals, the defense, the goalkeeper, all of it. But you can make 5 bullet points, right? And I'm using a random example. So I understand when you're passionate about something, but if you really love it, it's easy to just creatively put 5 or 6 points. But if you're passionate about it, it's a positive feeling. That's the whole objective. So how do we train our brain to easily look for these 4 or 5 things? Okay. And so the idea is to proactively train your brain. Simple exercise. Okay. Every evening before going to bed, just spend 3 or 4 minutes and think of good things that happened in your job every day. Okay. Just 3 or 4 minutes later in the evening, not necessarily before going to bed, maybe a little bit earlier during dinner. Think of what were 3 or 4 things that happened during the day that were positive. This can be expanded beyond the career. My sons learn this at the dinner. Sometimes he will ask that. So what are the 3 best things that happened today for you? And you got to take it and go, oh, okay, what's the first thing? Oh, I had this meeting, I had that. Getting into that framework in your brain, in your mindset, where you're proactively looking and remembering the positive things that happen means that you're in a positive frame. Converting that into saying, I liked this yesterday, so tomorrow I'm going to do something to develop that. So you're constantly training your brain to develop positive actions. This is obvious. This is ideally where possible. It's not possible for everyone to be constantly in positive people, but encourage the network around you. Let's change that. Be more proactive in finding those positive people and try to spend more time with you. If you've got this really close family member or friend that is a bit negative, I'm not saying dump them because we can't, but try and increase that amount of time you spend with positive people. Okay. This one is the most important. Okay. When you look in the mirror, make sure you see yourself. All of us, we have a picture on the mirror because we never see the full self. Some of us have a strong picture of a tiger or a lion in the mirror. Some of us have a strong picture of something else. There's always a picture of ourselves that filters what we observe in the mirror. Try and remove that as much as possible. All of us have it. Okay, it's not even, we all have a representation of ourselves that we actively seek in the mirror. So how do you get a more natural view of yourself in the mirror? Use confidence, use feedback, use close friends to give you feedback. Observe yourself. If you're angry, you reacted in an angry way. Evening, when you're a little bit calmer, reflect. See how you acted. I'm sure many of us have at some point. Eric, I'll come to you in a second. Thanks for the hand up. I'll just come to you in a second. We write an email or we say something in anger, and we feel, there are a small part of us, maybe at a later point, we think, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe that was a bit harsh. And then there's another part of us that will say, actually, that's justified. That person made me angry. And then the brain gears towards justifying that anger and that reaction. There's a subconscious process that happens. I'm not saying the process is completely flawed, but be aware of that process happening so you are more in control of it. Eric. Eric, you got a hand up. You want to ask a question? You're still on mute.
I'm sorry. I forget.
That's okay. Okay. So there's quite a few people who are put on, Jose Luis has also put on something. And it's important to train your brain to, one, be positive, but also at the same time, have a space where you can look at the mirror in terms of self-reflection in as natural and human way, without the picture of ourselves that we have subconsciously built up that is always has a little bit of bias. And the best way to do that is to surround yourself by people who can give you feedback, surround yourself in moments where you're a little more humble or feeling a bit better, or those kind of things, so you get a more accurate representation of self-awareness. Any questions so far on positive attitude and the rest of the attitude section? All right. Then let's move on to the section on effort. Okay. Again, effort is, and I'm going to talk about effort in a little more detail. I'm going to talk about effective effort. How many of you work less than 35 hours a week in a full-time job? So pro rata. So if you're doing a part-time job, that's fine. So pro rata, how many of you work less than 35 hours a week? Nobody. So none of this group, oh, Nancy, you do. But it's pro rata, right? So, I mean, if you're doing a part-time job, that's still, pro rata to a full-time job. Nancy, do you work less than 35 hours?
Yes, actually, I do.
Okay. Is that because you're in a part-time job or a full-time job where you're more?
No. Actually, I have my own job. I'm a life coach, so I do my clients the way I want it. I'm flexible with hours. So sometimes it depends. Every week I have a different working hours.
That's fair. That's fair.
Mm-hmm.
And because you're self-employed, you're your own corporation. You're already on your way to achieve your maximum potential, which is fantastic. But anyone else working in the corporate environment who feels that they do less than 35 hours? Rosemond, you as well? Or is that a question you want to ask?
No, I have the same job, more or less. I have my own practice and my own time. But when I say my own time, is my client's time, because sometimes I work at night and on the weekend. But that gives me as well the latitude to explore more courses and to be involved in in different classes. So in a way, I almost decide my timing, almost, because the client comes first, so they choose the timing. But I work 35 hours or even less. Unfortunately.
Again, it's not unfortunate. So that's a different circumstance in terms of you are having your own business and your workload you're flexible with it. You can control the incoming of client, and also it depends on how many clients and how much they want. So I get that. So that's a different scenario. My question was geared towards more people working in organizations with as part of a team, etc., where it's a little more fixed hours. In that kind of an environment, my expectation was no one is going to put their hands up and say, I get paid for a full week's job, but I don't really work that much. I didn't expect anyone to say that. And that was the typical point I wanted to bring up. So one of the things I would invite you to guess is, even a lot of you in workplaces, you probably feel you're working 40, 45, 50 hours at the workplace, but it feels that way emotionally. There's always efficient working. I'm going to invite you to consider that it's impossible to work more than 40 to 45 hours in a week. So all those people who do the 70 hours, 80-hour weeks, and I've been there myself, and a lot of people have been there. If you actually break it all down into actual work and what is it that efficient work, there's a lot of inefficiency that creeps in. Okay, and I'm talking purely on time and work. I'm not talking of being clever and all of that. That's separate. In terms of purely hours of work, we find that there's a lot of distractions. There's lots of the concentration and intensity is way. Again, it's all part of being human. I'm not saying it's this thing, but we sometimes spend multitasking, distractions. All of these elements creep in. And the way to manage that in an effective way is really track what you're doing, what your intensity levels are, the smartness to take good breaks to make it more optimal. All of you, many of you, not the self-employed, but people who work in corporations, have at some point felt the stretch, right? You're working long hours. How many of you notice the dip? Sometimes you're a little bit tired and tasks that early in the morning, if you're a morning person, that same task finishes in half an hour. Later on in the night, if you're a morning person, that same task takes an hour, hour and a half, 3 times as much. And that's again being human. I'm not saying that's bad or good, but it's about being aware of how to make that effort the most optimal in the day. Okay, I want to just make a reference in terms of effort and work-life balance. Work-life balance, I have this thing, people say at 6 o'clock, switch off your computer, go to your family, 5 o'clock, switch it off, or don't go to your bed with your computer, all kinds of patterns. My premise to you is find a model that works to you, especially in the modern world with remote working, thanks to the pandemic, remote work, etc. It's now no longer a simple case of 9 to 5 and stop and start. It might be, I'm not saying that's not what you should, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but more often than not, it's not practical. But that doesn't mean that it's not an effective work-life balance. Make a model that works for you. If that means it's 9 to 12 and then 3 to 7 or 3 to 8, if that means it's like 3 different slots, whatever a model that works for you, so it doesn't dilute your actual hours of effort, and it's compatible with your ecosystem, your team, your department. It'll be very difficult if your team does 9 to 5 and you want to do 3 to 9 in the afternoon or evening shift. That's going to be very tricky. That's not a work-life balance. You need to make sure it's compatible with your ecosystem. Any questions or comments on terms of all the concepts I've introduced regarding effort? Effective effort, not just the start point and the end point, is a very, very important point. So effective effort is important. And I also talk about work-life balance. In order to make sure that effort is in a good space, is to have your own definition of work-life balance that first of all works for you, so it doesn't dilute the hours you're spending on the effort, but also works for the ecosystem, the organization around you. Any comments or questions? If the effective effort is counting time lunch, you count what, okay. So if you're obviously if you're doing a 9 to 5 job and you're taking a 3-hour lunch break, I think that you should be counting those 3 hours, right? That's just basic. Be aware of the lunch you're taking. Do you want to count it or not count it? That's entirely up to you. But be aware that you're taking a 1-hour lunch break. Is that a good thing? If it's part of a balanced break that's making you come back after lunch and really start with high intensity, fantastic. If it's a break that is, you're going off to the pub and having lots of beers and you're coming back completely hammered, well, that's not a balanced break, and that's not going to really help you when you come back to work. So it's not about whether you want to count it or not. It's about what is the utilization of that break. So some people say, I switch off during the lunch break. I completely switch myself. I'll go to outer space. I enjoy the fresh air. I take a walk. I eat some good food, and then I come back. And that takes me half an hour, 1 hour, 1.5 hours, whatever. If that works for them such that when they come back, they are refreshed and they are high intensity, fantastic. If you're going out, getting drunk, and you just don't want to come back to work, but you're like, oh, I wish I could be in the pub a lot more, and I'm dragging myself half with alcohol and half like dreary, that's not useful. Yep, Jacqueline, you acknowledged the multitasking part, and I want to emphasize that we can't avoid it, but we should avoid it, if that makes sense. It's an absolute scientific fact, whether you like it or not. Our brain is not geared to be effective doing two things at the same time. All of us probably can do it at some level and we are tempted, but I would almost aggressively suggest to push back on yourself and look at the scenario and why you're doing two things at the same time. And do you really, really, really need to be doing those two things at the same time? Or is it that one is less important, but more fun? One is more important, but you don't like doing it and you're trying to mix and balance? Or what is the combination that's making you do two tasks at the same time? And it's not always pressure from above. Don't push the responsibility of your multitasking to above and the requirements of the job. That's not in your control. If you take it inwards and what you can do better, then you can start to train yourself to plan better and avoid multitasking. So good point. Okay, so even though you got the best attitude and even though you got the best effort, it still is only halfway towards maximizing your potential. The successful people not only have the attitude and the effort, what they really, really excel in and what's really, really crucial is the execution. How are they executing this combination of effort and attitude in your workplace? So what does this execution mean? So if I'm going to use three parameters of how we are in the workplace, right? In our workplace, and it's a framework. The framework I'm going to use is you have people around you, right? Because you're always working for people. Even if you're your own boss, whether it's Nancy doing her coaching or Rosemary doing her coaching as well, you're still working for your clients. You're working for yourself. Maybe you have your own boss, but you're still working. So you're in an ecosystem of people where someone is benefiting from the work you do. All of us, without exception, no matter what job and work we do, there is a framework to say that we are doing it for other people. Even if you think of a pure capitalist mechanism where you're doing it for the money, people only pay you money if they see the benefit of what you're doing for the job, right? So as a concept, people are the most important thing in your workplace. And if you can understand and digest that, you go a long way towards improving the potential at work. Okay? Always put effort in identifying your stakeholders. Who are your stakeholders in your workplace? Okay? Your clients. Okay? And don't forget, clients are not only the external ones. There are internal clients as well. No matter what department you work in, ultimately there is an internal client as well. Even if you're in sales, external facing, you're selling to the company, but you're also this internal clients for which you're performing that sales operation. You're also performing the sales operation so the delivery side can really deliver its products and its services. There's always an internal client. Have a map of that. Who are your clients? Know them. Who are decision makers and influencers? It sounds simple. We all understand that. But if I told you in your job, who are the top 3 decision makers and influencers? Will you be able to name them? Some of you might find it challenging. If I take that to the next level and say, how much of a good relationship are you building with these people? If you tell me fantastic relationship is productive, great. That part is well executed. But I'll hazard a guess many of you are not really thinking in those terms. You're thinking, I'm going to go to work. I have these clear 3 or 4 things I need to achieve today. That's my task list. I'm going to do these tasks and I'm going to go home. That limits your execution from a people perspective, because those 3 or 4 tasks have been assigned by your boss, most likely, or assigned by your role. But if you don't think about how it works in the ecosystem of people, you are selling yourself short. Okay? And remember, the decision makers and influencers are rarely, I'll repeat this, it's very rarely just your boss. In fact, it almost never is in most corporations just your boss. You have to understand that. The boss might decide something, you go and ask boss for permission and he says yes, he says no, but it's rarely the fact that he is in full control of the decision and it's just him who's just randomly picking one decision to make. Usually it filters in from above and other external influences. So really understanding the decision makers and influencers is crucial. Also, we always ignore who makes us successful. Who are the people who will get us successful? See, my camera has just died again. I'm going to switch off video and come back 1 second. Okay, that should resolve itself in a second. So who are the people that you need to get the job done? That's another crucial point that you really, really need to address and remember. Because you might be serving your clients, but in order to be successful for your clients, you need people behind to deliver. Your success in many cases depends on other people. So who are the people that can deliver for you? And have a map, even if it's just on a whiteboard. Okay, spend half an hour, 1 hour, 2 hours, even 10 hours, looking at the people around you and think, who are my key people around me in my work ecosystem? Use this framework as a starting point. And straight away, you increase the ability to achieve more potential at your workplace, because people are everything, no matter what job you're doing. And that is, yes, Vasam. I'm usually looking at people and just thinking who you want to kill. Again, we should revisit the slide on positive attitude and negative attitude, Vasam, and that might be a separate exercise we might want to do. But I also sense there's a humor in that as well, which is fair enough. But it's important though, and you know, you probably said that in humor, and I respect that. But we all are in that state where we go and we think, oh my God, these horrible people. But what that does to us, no one's going to change, right? Or whatever horrible things that you perceive they are doing, those people are not going to change. Your perception and your approach towards them is the only thing you have in control. If you choose to continue to look upon them as, in inverted commas, horrible people, that is the conscious choice you're making, right? They are not going to change. You're going to constantly keep that mindset that they are horrible people and you hate them. We go back to the slide on the positive attitude piece. You're never going to be able to bridge that gap and build this relationship and achieve your potential. So I know you said that in a little bit in a jest. I respect that, but a lot of us have that intrinsic mindset where we think that the bosses and the organizations are against us, people are horrible, we are the victims of external factors. If you have that mindset, it doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong. It's not about being right or wrong. It's about the mindset, because people are not going to change. Their behaviors and their actions are not going to change. The only thing you have control is in your mindset and your attitude. Any questions or comments on the discussion so far? Okay. I hope these things are clear. I'm going to go into an interactive session in a second where I want to describe some actual practical scenarios and how do we approach this in a positive mindset. So I'll go on with the theory if there's no other questions, but if anyone wants to make a comment, please do. Right. So once you map the people, which in my opinion is the most important part, you also have to have an understanding of the processes in place in your organization and the tools that make you successful and make you achieve your potential. Even a simple thing, when I talk of tools, I'm jumping into tools like email. If you are able to use that Outlook tool effectively, that goes further on towards your achieving your potential. Okay. Remember, when you're executing, think of what is the value you're building. Business value. How are you going to contribute towards that? Ultimately, your corporation, your entity is doing something for other entities in order to exchange value. They deliver value to other entities provide commercial, they basically pay money. That's how corporations work, providing value and charging money in return. That's the capitalist world. You can't challenge that world because that's the world you're living in. If you don't want a capitalistic world, you need to go to a socialist world. And that world is very limited in this planet today. So ultimately, even the most successful or most ethical organizations, the success factor is still about bringing value to the customer. In terms of executing that value, you can be better or you can be worse, but the value is still the ultimate criteria. You can't be an ethical company and be in a huge loss, because then you're not a company anymore, right? So bringing that value is crucial. So what is bringing that value? Understanding that value is important, is crucial. If you can articulate clearly, what does your company bring value to its client and how does it try to stand out? If you can understand that, straight away you are in a better position to contribute towards that value. And remember, no matter what you think the company should be doing, the leadership, what they are communicating and what their direction is important. You cannot be different to what the leadership direction is. You don't have a choice there, right? That's something you have to digest. The second part I would talk about process and tools and general is about the feedback. I think I talked about that. Again, this is about how you're executing in your processes when you do things around you. Make sure as part of that process, you have a feedback loop process. Okay, so that's important, and be very open to looking for skeletons in your cupboard. I'm not saying constantly beat yourself up or lose your confidence, but it's exactly the opposite. Increase your confidence by being open to take feedback and being open to take more steps on the ladder of being better. They're two different things. If you're constantly just beating yourself up and diminishing your confidence, that's not great execution. But if you're happy to take feedback and improve and look upon it as you're very good and you want to be even better, then opening up those skeletons in your cupboard is a very useful thing. Again, communication, I talked about conflict, right? People who constantly challenge. Make sure if you're challenging an opinion, you're confident to challenge it, but make sure you're doing it in a skillful, healthy way. It's always better to challenge an opinion because you have a different opinion than suppressing it. But if you're going to challenge, build the skill around that challenge. And what you do around build skill is make sure the person you're challenging is comfortable that you respect them. Make sure they're comfortable that it's not coming out of a relationship or an emotion. You know, it's not coming out of jealousy. It's not coming out of insecurity. Make sure the communication is coming through. Thank them for their opinion and say you have an alternate opinion to make an alternate solution. Always express your solutions, but make sure it's coming from a place of cognition, which is logic, not coming from emotion, which is, that guy always is speaking so much. I need to put my voice in there. I want to cut him down. I think he thinks he knows too much, and I want to say that he doesn't know it all. I want to challenge it. These are all relationship-based interruptions. You want to reduce that. You want to really go around and saying, you know what, that's a good idea, but I can maybe have this idea, or maybe there's a risk in that idea, and this idea could address that risk. Maybe I have a good idea, but I can integrate that idea into mine. That's cognitive. That's logic. So look for logical ways and be aware of the voice of your head, behind your head, constantly saying, that guy, that girl, she's always that, she's always this, I want to challenge her, she's my competition, or he's my competition, and all those kind of things. We're all human beings. We all have it. Be aware of it and try and make sure a big part of your contributions are cognitive in nature. Okay. And of course, it sounds very simple, but how many of us struggle with Excel or the Word and the Outlook and the little buttons in Outlook? How do you send it? It's your job to kind of train yourself to a certain level of skills and not depend. It still reflects badly if you're still struggling to cope with a button on an Outlook system to send an email. People do it, but always try and make sure you raise your levels up in technology and tools in your organization. Any questions in process and tools and some of the points I've shared in the bullet points? Any hands up? Nope. I hope I'm not putting you guys to sleep. And I hope you're finding this useful. I'm going to carry on into some scenarios, and that's where I will proactively solicit some feedback and experiences. Gerardo, you want another example, or is that what you're asking? Do you want another example of cognitive conflict? Is that right? Is that what you're asking? I don't see Gerardo. Where is Gerardo? Is that a yes? No. So cognitive conflict, again, I'll explain that in more, is when you want to propose either risks or, risks in someone else's opinion, purely, yes, I'll provide you. So think of, let's talk of scenario, right? Football. I don't know why today I'm focused on football as a random example. So you've got the head coach thinking that we should play a 4-4-2 kind of a system. That's the way the players are organized. Okay. If you really hate your coach and you're an assistant coach or you're a different coach and you're like, I don't like you. This is, I'm going to say 4-4-2 is not going to work. We should do 3-5-3. Okay. Because these are the players, you like these players. There's an emotional reason why there is a conflict between you and the other coach who's deciding on the 4-4-2 kind. If that is coming because there is a communication breakdown, you hate each other and you just want to fight him all the time, that's relationship conflict. That's never healthy. But if you're telling him 4-4-2 is a great system, but look at the players we have. We have these really good wide players who can run up and down from the wings. So maybe having a 3-5-2 is a better idea. Or, if you do a 4-4-2, you're missing out on some of these people. Also, your two defense at the back are injured. So that's kind of a discussion where you are looking at it from a logical way. You love your coach. You're absolutely respect him. But you're also happy to discuss with him because you also have your space in that table to discuss these ideas. He's very good and you respect him. He's like a brother. He's a great coach, but you also have your own idea. So it's purely cognitive. It doesn't matter where the conflict, Jacqueline, to your point, it doesn't matter. It's not about why others' conflict towards you comes. You be the bigger person and control your jealousy of the other person. You can't change someone else being jealous of you. You can be self-aware of the perception that someone is jealous of you, and you can resist the temptation of reacting to what you perceive as someone's jealousy. I'm not saying that's false or that's true. It doesn't matter. The only thing you can do is perceive it. So you can change the scope of the discussion in your own mind and your mindset and say, I don't mind what that conflict is coming from. I will see if there is any sensible parts of that idea that I can integrate into my idea, because a second opinion is always better than a single opinion. There's always some part of a second opinion you can integrate into your own opinion. So if you welcome that, then that's an approach towards creating and receiving conflict. And Nancy, you make a good point. You know, it's about the communication as well. Another way to build your ideas, but also make sure people understand why your idea. So, you know, it sounds stupid in that football example. If you go to the coach and says, Coach, I like your 4-4-2 idea. It's a really good idea, and I really believe that in most cases it will work. But can I just suggest something, please? You know, here are 4 people in our team. These 4 people are more suited to a 3-5-2 system. And I think if you do a 4-4-2 in the current scenario with the current team members, with a few injuries, whatever the explanation, this will work better. You know, when you sound it like that, with a lot of caveating around the relationship, you're massaging the relationship, you're maintaining the relationship, and you're giving feedback in a nice way, the coach, there's a possibility, there's a better possibility that the coach will listen to you and encourage your thoughts. Okay, a worst case, you'll say, yeah, but I like my idea because it's probably, the risk is there, but I still want to stick to it. That's okay. But at least you will get a better space for your ideas. And be very self-aware of the mindset when you think it's the other person. We can't control the other person. It's your perception of the other person that's there in you. And that's what you can change. Any other questions around conflict, cognitive conflict, relationship conflict, and how you can improve communication with people and your own mindset? We are all human beings. We are not perfect. We all get angry. We all get frustrated. It's a competitive environment. I'll always say this. In the workplace, most workplaces are pyramid in structure, right? So there's always the chief executive officer, one, or sometimes it's a joint CEO. So it's a pyramid structure where it goes up to one person at the top. And at every level, it's competitive in nature. By design, that is how organizations are, right? So among your colleagues, it is natural there's an element of competition. The whole corporate world is designed towards bonuses, you know, who gets the better bonus among the team, who gets the better rating among the team. They're constantly putting competition as the framework of environment. You can't change that. You can't resist that. So it's impossible that at some level inside you, there is a sense of competition. There is a sense of a little bit of insecurity because, you know, it's competitive in nature. You would almost have to be a robot to not have at least a little bit of that. I'm not for 1 second suggesting that you can be a robot. What I'm suggesting is be aware of it and learn to manage it better. So Nancy asked, if you're working in a place, what is the right way, Joseph, what is the best way to address your opinion when you're working in a corporation? You need to feel you're valid and important. So I'll explain that. So you need to create the space to address your opinion, and you can take some responsibility and accountability of creating the space. Okay. The high level principles are about displaying respect, being self-aware that it's not coming from an emotional space. Okay. You need to feel you're valid and important. At some level translates to, at this point, I don't feel valid and important. So that's an emotion that's reflective of the second statement. And it's not a criticism, by the way. This is all of us have that in us. It's being aware of that. So you need to feel valid and important. The fact that you're writing it down suggests that at some level, it's not at the level you wanted. So change that perception that it's existing and address it again as if, what is an alternate perception that you can feel better about, confident about addressing your opinion. So principles, next time you're in a meeting, acknowledge other people's points, okay? Don't jump into, okay, I need to be confident, I need to put my point across. Learn to connect with other people, acknowledge other people's point, and learn to do the piggyback on another point to put your point in. Do you know what I mean by piggyback onto someone's point to put your point in? It's like the same thing. I gave that coach example where the coach says it's 4-4-2 system. You say, that's a great idea. I think the 4-4-2 has a lot of benefits. So you're kind of connecting to his opinion and then gently providing an alternate opinion while keeping him comfortable. Again, I can't be prescriptive and say this and say that, because that's not, there's some skill and context to each conversation and each opinion, but at a high level, there's some frameworks you can apply, which is to bring it in. Also, when you express your opinion, I learned these simple tips, and I've got a section on simple tips, but I'll introduce some of them now, is say, can I suggest something? That's a much softer entry point than, hey, I want to say, I think this is what will work. Think of that whole point when someone says, you're expressing an opinion, someone says, I don't think that will work. Here's what will work. Okay, that's one interruption. And imagine that's how you have been interrupted on your opinion. And imagine if someone says, actually, you know what, that's a good point. Can I also suggest something a little different? As a recipient of that message, you first feel that acknowledgement, and you then become attentive to the build up from your idea. It's almost like it feels emotionally that someone else is building on your idea. And that's a great receptive way of doing it. Could you please more details on skeletons in your cupboard? That's a metaphor in terms of, it's possible that some of us have the dark places we don't go to. So some of us might be attention seekers. We need more attention than other people. And we don't want to acknowledge that. We kind of hide that. That becomes like a skeleton in the cupboard. Be open to acknowledging that I am an attention seeker. Be open to acknowledging that I need validation all the time. Be open to acknowledging that my personality needs my voice to be spoken a lot more. These are the deeper personality traits. Be open to acknowledge them. And that's something, be ready to go deeper into your vulnerabilities is what I want to explain in terms of skeletons in your cupboard. Jose, is that clear?
Yes.
Okay. So let's look at some scenarios and make some practical applications. So the first one is the horrible colleague, okay? This time I really want some of you to give me some examples. Okay, any of you volunteer to kind of talk about this horrible colleague in your workplace that you are currently or in the past have struggled with, and why it was so? Anyone, just think of any example and let's bring some few examples to light. Go on, be brave. Here's where you can bitch about your colleague. It's a safe place. It's not in the corporate anymore. In all cases, when you fight that fire with fire, most people around you will be like, oh my God, these two people are always fighting. And it never rarely reflects well on you. So I appreciate the humor. It's very welcome. But be careful of that getting into your mindset that I am not going to give that person an inch, because that mindset means you're going to come across every conflict in a relationship conflict. It's never going to be cognitive. It's going to be relationship conflict. And that means you have the least, your own potential, you're using the least of your potential in terms of, but Vasim, if it wasn't humor, then you understand what I'm saying. If you have the mindset that, I love boxing between men, maybe that's okay. a friendly boxing match. That's a good idea. But going back to your point, if you go with a mindset that I will not back down, you are comfortably setting yourself into the relationship conflict environment. So that's important. So thank you for that, Nancy.
And I'm sorry, another main.
Okay, you didn't let it very quickly become conflict. You acknowledged that he was you didn't call him boss, the chief. You kind of acknowledged that dynamic and you gave yourself space. The third point is credibility. You built that credibility and you gave a safe space. By asking him, what do you think now? You provided him credibility and respect, the respect which he thought maybe he was at risk of losing. That opened up the floodgate. So that action, in my opinion, just that asking him, what do you think? It validated that the respect is not threatened for him in a subconscious level. And it also reminded him that things are not the same as before and he could open up a bit. So there were 3 or 4 patterns in your story that I found very, very fascinating, but also very relatable in terms of those elements. So thank you for sharing, by the way, Either. Would you agree with some of the things I said?
Sure.
Okay. So that's very good. Thank you for sharing. So having said all the nice things and all the wonderful things, and to go back to Weston's point, there's a line in which you don't feel comfortable in the situation. You don't feel you're still comfortable. You're still suffering from the horrible colleague. You've done all of the previous bullet points and you're confident you have done enough, and now you're suffering. Then the point is, don't be afraid to escalate. Escalate means to heighten it to a level. If you're unsuccessful in the informal conversation, being nice, being positive, trying to build bridges, and if you're comfortable that you have tried it enough and you've given yourself the space to try it enough, don't then hesitate to escalate. Some people say, no, never escalate. That's the wrong thing. I disagree. I think there comes a level at which escalation and bringing a level is thin. But remember, there's one tip I will say: escalate to your own boss to bring him as a sponsor before directly going to the colleague's boss, assuming the colleague has a different boss. If it's your own boss, then that's not relevant. But if it's a different boss, make sure you're escalating to your own boss first, making sure he is on your side and can advise you and support you in the escalation towards the other person's boss. So that's the one tip I'd say about escalation, and never being afraid of taking it, because if your objective is the resolution of the problem that is inhibiting your positive emotional state, it needs to be resolved. You can make the positive approaches, and you should be nice, you should be positive. Make sure you strengthen your base in a nice positive attitude approach, but you also make sure you are having the space to, as a resolution, to resolve the situation, to go into an escalation mode. So enough about the horrible colleague. Hopefully that was useful in terms of, Jose, I know you got a point, but can I just pause that? I want to talk about the boss situation, and maybe we come back to your point, Jose, at the end. I'm just worried about the time. And I think the boss point is also very important. So I'll quickly go into the boss situation. How do you deal with the horrible boss? Again, I'm going to go through the bullet points in the interest of time, and then I'll open it up for discussion just in case people have to drop off. But I'll stay on another half an hour if whoever wants to have the follow-up discussion. So when you talk about the horrible boss, how do you deal with the horrible boss? And that's, again, an important thing. Always at the point of interview, and this is something I highlighted about the job potential. At some point, you're walking into a job interview thinking, I am competing to get this job. I want to win this job. But be careful about understanding the job as you originally perceive it. Okay? Because a very, very crucial element of your job and the things you love about that job is going to be your boss. So when you go into an interview situation, make sure you are subconsciously assessing, not you're judging your boss. Be careful about just judging him. Oh, he's a bully, or that's not what I'm saying. But think about what his personality, his tone, his language is, and think of how that impacts you. It's not about him and judging him. It's about how you are going to find comfort in working for him. So that's important. So make sure you look for any warning signs and challenges in the interview process. There are some simple techniques to find that out. You can ask him about culture in the organization. You can ask him about how was his approach to solving problems. You can ask him about what is the typical day in the life of his team member. You can ask him about what are growth opportunities. So these kind of questions start to give you his personality. I do a detailed session on interview process. I won't go into details, but there are always ways to look for warning signs. And remember one thing, it's don't fight your boss. Avoid a scenario, and I'm saying it's always possible, but avoid a scenario where you are in conflict with your boss, because majority, in fact, most majority of the time, you are likely to be on the losing side, and it's not going to be healthy. No matter what opinion of him you have in your mind, no matter how horrible you perceive him to be, if you set yourself in a mindset of conflict with him, you are likely to come out of it worse. Simply because of the hierarchy. That's how organizations are designed. You know, the whole idea, I'm going to complain to his boss and I'm going to complain. And this is about the relationship conflict. This is not about bullying or any HR elements which are criminal in nature. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking of natural relationship conflict. Okay, and make sure that doesn't come in and it's a clash of personalities and you hate him and he's horrible. Don't fight him. That's the worst situation to draw yourself in. The way to manage those complex personality issues and the difference in communication is try and always focus on some common goals. Remember, if he's putting undue pressure on him, there is a possibility that he's helpless. Remember, being that, I know it sounds bad because I seem to be justifying the boss. It's a lot tougher to be that person in the middle where you get shit from above, unrealistic goals from above, which you can't really fight back, and you don't have your hand and feet on the buttons because you depend on the level below for pressing the buttons and getting the job done. So you're kind of in the middle. It's a horrible, horrible place to be when the shit hits the ceiling. So remember, the pressure that he's putting on you may be his response to pressures from above and the shit sandwich that he is in. Pardon my French, but that's a common term that people use. So be sensitive about these things and try to see if you can change the perspective from, I don't want him to put pressure on me, I want him to stop, to kind of bring into a problem-solving mode where you can have a discussion that is sensitive to his pressure. Okay? Always have a mindset of how can you get your boss promoted. Wherever possible, start your mindset with how can I get my boss promoted? It's a very simple mindset. If you can answer that question and think of 2 or 3 things you can do to get him promoted, because if you are able to contribute towards that, he is going to appreciate what you did for him. And when he goes a level up, you have a better chance of going that level up with him. It always creates a positive mindset and a positive relationship aspect with your boss. Okay. And then when you talk about bad bosses, there are 2 kinds of bad bosses. One is the unconscious bad boss. Okay, that is the boss that is simply not competent. He has in his mirror a picture of the perfect boss. That's the picture that's stuck in. So every time he goes in front of the mirror, that's the picture he sees. So he is not conscious of his weaknesses, of their strengths. You can be the bigger person by filling in the gaps. Indeed, chess is an interesting game. That's a perspective, okay? How do you move those gaps? But even if you take chess as a perspective, try and put it into this framework where the objective is not to kill the king, but to see if you can make the king an even bigger king. Okay, you can use chess as a playset in terms of predicting your moves and predicting the bigger game, but make sure the objective is not to kill the king, but to make the king even better. Okay, so contribute to their success and support their weaknesses in a respectful, nice, intelligent way. Okay, if it's a conscious bad boss where he is skilled, but it's about relationship, it's threatened, etc., have the conversation. You know, there is nothing wrong in having a conversation with your boss saying that I would like to improve the communication and the dynamic with you. That's a simple sentence. You know, you have issues with him, think of it as a relationship dynamic. Go to your bad boss and say, boss, I would love to improve my communication and mindset with you so we can work more effectively together. That's the starting point. Set clear goals. Make sure communication is very precise and effective. A lot of times I was coaching someone, a director, just earlier today, and she's having severe challenges with someone underneath her. And it's like, you know, they were challenging her. She was changing the deadline because she was going on holiday, and they were challenging, you're going on holiday. Why is my deadline going low? Make sure the communication is really clear and effective. If it is your holiday, that's fine, but make sure it's earlier. Be the bigger person, vice versa. If you're communicating with your boss, make sure it's clear, it's long film. If you have to explain an email with additional words, which is not there in the email in the first place, then it's possible that those words did not go through in that email and that person didn't understand. So, you know, a lot of times you go to a situation, I wrote this email. Look, what does this sentence mean? This sentence means blah, 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 blah. And you're putting in words that was not there in that sentence because you're retrospectively building the meaning of that sentence in your head. But if you remove those words that you have added on verbally while discussing that sentence, then that sentence could be misinterpreted. The communication is very, very, try and be extra clear. Put in the extra adjectives, the nouns, the pronouns, all those things, put in the extra so your communication is clear. Have goals that are acknowledged, that really work for both of you. Also, seek other peer managers' advice. Have mentors in the organization to seek advice. And again, with the horrible colleague, if all of these things fail, escalate, but escalate in a way that you are talking about building bridges and trying to make it work. Be careful about escalating to your boss's boss and saying, my boss is horrible and incompetent. That is, again, a strategy that is unlikely to work. Absolutely play the corporate game, as Yolanda suggests, but play it skillfully. Because your boss's boss hired your boss. He has, at some level, support for him. If you're going to go and challenge that judgment of your boss's boss, balance of probability, it's not going to be received well. So you need to be clear about how your challenges. And get better at what you're doing. Sometimes all the communication with your boss and everything and all the issues you have with your boss, just get better at your job, even better at your job, because ultimately your boss's success depends on your job. No matter what role you're doing, your boss's success depends on you. And as you get better, it's impossible for your boss to ignore that. Those are high-level tips on the horrible boss. Let me finish the simple tools bit, which I wanted to say. That's the last slide, and then I'll come back to questions. I'm just worried about the time. I know a lot of people are dropping out. So 2 simple things in order to going back to simple things you can do on a day-to-day basis in improving your potential at work. Set yourself goals. Having goals on a weekly basis, on a bi-weekly basis for yourself, that in the workplace you say, I'm going to achieve this week. I'm going to achieve these 2 things, these 3 things this week. I'm going to get myself into the stage in 6 months. It always goes a long way. It's something in your control. It's something you can do. It's a simple technique that gets you achieving your potential much better. Plan your week. Again, this is the expansion of that. Okay. Again, if you're setting goals, make sure you're also reflecting and validating them and tracking yourself towards them. That's again an important thing. And also always get support around you, mentors, coaches, bosses, wherever practical, build a network around you to be better. These simple tips, it's as simple as it gets. It's something everyone in this audience can do. Goes a huge way in helping us get better and achieve our potential. I'm going to pause here. I rushed through the last couple of slides. Apologies for that. Usually I have a little more discussion around that, a little more explanation, but I'll go back to the horrible boss and also the horrible colleague. Jose, you had a question. I haven't forgotten you. I'll now come back to your question and I'll invite questions from others as well.
Thank you, Prakash.
Put it in terms of how does it impact you, and then translate that into what is something positive I can get out of this. Easier said than done. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this is super easy, but the more you train your brain in this direction, the better it is for you in terms of approach and how to approach this. The moment your brain starts to fill itself up, this is horrible, this is a big fat elephant, look at how other people are dealing with it, that's not nice. Your brain then takes the emotion deep in, and the productive part of your brain, that's kind of starting to diminish because it's negative emotion. If you take all that out, try your best to take all that out and say, this is something big, and I either need to navigate around it or I need to make it my friend. What do I need to do and how can I do it? And think of it in that direction. And then the actions and practicalities come out. But that helps. I'm not saying it's easy, by the way. You know, this is challenging. You know, in execution, it's not so easy. But that's the approach that has a better chance of success than trying to beat the elephant or trying to kill the elephant or trying to change the elephant.
Yes, my doubt is between two ways. One way is to get around the elephant and avoid it, especially at the beginning when you are new in a new company organization, and at least till you get a level of trust that everybody knows how you work or who you are and what solutions can you bring. That could be the first option. But the other option is what said Wesam, that when yes, we should not allow that from the beginning we have to put any kind of boundaries. So okay, I come here to work, I will respect everybody, but I really want to have a respectful relationship, and to, of course, in a very polite way, to place any kind of boundary. So there are the two options: what to do, to go around the elephant.
But it's a mindset, right? It's a mindset, right? And I'm not suggesting one. It's always a combination, right? It's never. If it's just a simple black and white, say follow X and follow Y, and this is what you do, it doesn't. It's a mindset thing, right? As long as your mindset is positive, and we talked about the mindset at the beginning, the attitude, as long as your goals towards your approach, as long as you're doing actions on your approach, whether it's, I want to set boundaries, I want to establish myself on day one, I will make sure no one steps on my toes on day one, I'll establish my periphery on day one, all that stuff, whatever works for you. As long as there is a healthy balance of productive, positive feeling forward. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do the boundaries. I'm not saying you should have no boundaries and be suffering in silence and let people stamp over you. I'm not saying any of that. I'm saying find a way that is comfortable for you, which still gives you enough space. because one extreme representation of that setting boundaries is you come in on day one, your mind is constantly thinking, I am going to set my boundaries. I'm going to make sure no one's going to bully me. I'm going to really focus on setting my boundaries. And half the time, your mind is concentrating on setting boundaries with colleagues. So even if someone says something a little extra, your brain is racing. He's stepping on the boundary. I need to push him back. So you will come across in that whole mindset where it's boundary. That's one extreme, and that's never going to be productive, right? The other extreme is, as Wessam says, and others, you walk in and you have no boundaries and you think everything is okay and you let anyone tramp over you, and then you're completely in a small space. It's not black and white where you should be. I mean, I'll take the easy way out and say, find your space in that line. But one is you're completely defensive in nature because you're worried about bullies and you're worried about setting boundaries. And one is you're completely sensitive and you're being bullied all the time. The truth is somewhere in the middle, and you need to find a good space where you're still reaching out and making people comfortable and making your path. That make sense?
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Pleasure. Anyone else with questions or comments?